Today I'll be discussing why we believe in using fixed index annuities as an alternative to bonds in our investment strategy and planning. If you're interested in learning more and are curious how a fixed index annuity might help you as you plan for retirement, stay tuned. I'm Spencer Ford, CEO and Wealth Advisor at Conservative Financial Solutions, as well as a certified financial planner professional. Let's get into today's video. First of all, let's briefly discuss what a fixed index annuity is. We'll have a video providing a deeper dive into the ins and outs of this investment vehicle, including the good, bad, and ugly, coming out in just a couple of weeks. But for now, a brief overview should suffice. A fixed index annuity is a long-term savings vehicle meant to provide the owner with protection when the market goes down and growth when the market is up. Returns are based on the performance of an underlying index, such as the S&P 500, for example. In many instances, returns are subject to a cap, which is what we'll use in our example today. And a cap is the maximum rate of interest that the annuity can earn in a given period of time. So let me walk you through an example. Let's assume that you put $100,000 into a fixed index annuity and the market increases by 10% over the course of the next year, but your cap is 8%. 8% would be credited to your account at the end of the period, and your account would now be worth $108,000. Now, let's assume that the market declines over the next year, and it declines by 20%. Your account value is protected, meaning your $100,000 stays $100,000 because there's a floor on your policy that says you are not going to go down just because the market goes down. How has this type of strategy compared to bonds over the past 20 years? Well, over the past 20 years, the U.S. aggregate bond index has averaged 3%. Oddly enough, the math works out exactly to 3% from 2005 to 2024. And over the past 10 years, it has only averaged a whopping 1.47%, not even enough to outpace inflation, which has averaged 2.86% over that same time period. Now, if you're retired, taking income, and have a portion of your money invested in a bond index similar to the one described before, you have a problem. Let me walk you through an example. Mike has $1 million saved for retirement. He needs $40,000 a year plus 2% more for inflation each year to keep up with his expenses. And let's look at what that looks like. So here's Mike right here. He has $1 million. He needs $40,000 a year plus inflation in order to keep up with expenses. And when Mike goes to do retirement planning, he meets with his financial advisor and he's placed in the good old trusty 60-40 portfolio. Maybe you've heard of it. 60% in stocks, modeled by the S&P 500 in our example, and 40% in bonds, which is modeled by the U.S. aggregate bond index. Now, Mike's advisor told him, and rightfully so, that now that he's retired and taking income from his investments, he needs a portion of his money in less risky investments in case of a market downturn. And that made sense to Mike, which is why 40% of his money ended up in bonds. Now, let's assume that Mike started that plan 20 years ago in 2005. How did things work out for him? Well, they didn't work out very badly at all. At the end of that 20-year period, he has over $2.1 million in his retirement accounts, where he originally started with $1 million, and that's after taking income of over $970,000. But his 40% in bonds only produced a whopping 3% over the past 20 years and only 1.47% over the last 10-year period. Essentially, 40% of Mike's money is hardly doing any of the lifting for him. So what's the solution? Well, the solution is probably not going to be to take all of the money and dump it in the market. Depending upon your situation, that could mean taking on significantly more risk than your investment plan can tolerate. So what is the solution? Well, one potential solution might be a fixed indexed annuity. So let's assume that Mike has a do-over. Instead of putting that 40% into the US aggregate bond index or a bond indexed fund, he decides to put that 40% into a fixed index annuity with an 8% cap. And as of the time of this recording, caps are actually at 10 to 11% or in the 10 to 11% range. But hey, let's not overpromise and underperform. So we're going to stick with an 8% cap for our example. Here's what Mike's returns look like now. Instead of having 40% in that bond position, only providing an average return of 3% over the past 20 years, his 40% fixed index annuity position with a cap of 8% produced an average return of 5.53%. And over the most recent 10-year period, it produced a return of 5.6%. That's over a 280% increase from what the bond position did over the past 10 years. Now, how does this shake out in terms of value for Mike? Well, he now has over $2.5 million, almost $2.6 million in his retirement accounts after taking out the same $970,000 in income. The total difference between the 60-40 portfolio with bonds and the 60-40 portfolio with the fixed index annuity is more than $450,000. That, in a nutshell, is why we use fixed index annuities as a bond alternative in our investment strategy and planning. Over the past 20 years, it has shown to be more beneficial to be invested in a vehicle tied to the market with a cap than it has been to be invested in a bond index fund, such as something that's tracking the US aggregate bond index. A fixed index annuity is not the right investment vehicle for everyone. It always comes down to your individual needs and circumstances, and there is so much to take into consideration when deciding if one is right for you or not. But for those who are taking income, need protection, and want growth linked to the market, it can be a good option. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit subscribe. And as always, I'm Spencer Ford, and we'll see you in the next one.